Boom, boom, boom. And welcome to another winter workshop. This time we're talking about win-loss surveys, win-loss interviews, winning and losing. And why are we talking about it? Well, of many reasons. And the most urgent one of these is the impending doom. 2023 recession is upon us, or so they want us to believe. And so every expense we do needs to be ROI driven, and you need to count every dollar, and it's obviously it's true. We need to count every dollar anyway. We need to convert better anyway, a recession or not. So how can we convert more deals? How can we improve our win rate and close more demos and all that stuff? So win-loss analysis is one of the tools in our toolbox. So this is the topic for today. Let's test our video audio chat capabilities. So in the chat, can you please just tell me, answer the question, are you doing win-loss analysis today or not? On a regular basis, I mean, like quarterly or something. Just check. Nope, not yet. Some folks are doing. All righty. Very good. So I am also not doing it today. I mean, not in an organized fashion. We're doing it in a more of, I want to say, unorganized fashion. But I'm also eager to learn from this workshop too. How can I take my what I'm doing into a new level and be better at it? Also, if you have questions to our presenter who's joining us any minute now, please use the questions tab, and that way they don't get lost in the chatter. So the session is about 30 minutes or so, and then I'll jump back on the stage and facilitate the Q&A process. So whenever you hear something that prompts a question, please post it in the questions tab. We'll get to it, I promise. All right, without further ado, let's get our speaker on the stage here. So our speaker is the head of marketing for a company called Clozd, right? Clozd. And Trenton, if you can hear me, Trenton, blink twice or join me on the stage. Trenton here is going to tell us how to do win-loss analysis, and there you go.
Hey,
we have visual.
Yeah, I'm proud of you for pronouncing the company name correctly, and that's one we've toyed around with on the marketing team a little bit.
What are some alternatives that you're hearing?
People pronounce it in 100 different ways. You'd be surprised. I've heard Clozd, closet. So, yeah.
We're in the closet, but we want to come out of the closet.
Yeah, that's right.
Win-loss analysis. All right.
Yeah, you got it. Yep.
So I'm going to just hop off the stage. You can keep an eye also on the questions tab and see if there's anything you want to answer in the moment as you're talking about it. Otherwise, I'll come back in 30 minutes and we'll go through all those things. So yeah, share your slides and then off to the races.
Sounds good. So let me share here. And I think these are way better when they're interactive. So I would love questions. I get a little bit bored when it's just me talking to slides. So please jump in with questions or comments, and I'd love to dive deeper on stuff, especially if you start to feel like it looked like people aren't doing win-loss analysis as much in this audience, but sometimes we'll present and it really quickly comes to light that people are a little more experienced with this. So, and then the other thing I want to ask, maybe drop it in the chat actually, is I'd love to get a feel for like the audience I'm speaking with. I assume most of you are marketers or at least revenue influencers types. So I'd love maybe just a few of you drop in some of your job titles and maybe, or Are you an enterprise? Are you like, where are you playing? Are you mid-market? Just to give me a sense of like your pipeline, so I can tailor the message a little bit differently here, as any good marketer would, right? And there's some names in here that look familiar to me, maybe from some past jobs or different presentations we've done. All right, so let me dive into this. So the way I think about win-loss analysis is, to me, and this hits home. It's one of the reasons I love working here, is I use it every day as the head of marketing at Clozd. I use our own internal win-loss analysis program like crazy, and I'm lucky that I have all the resources that I have and can use it in the depth that I can. Where past companies, I just haven't been able to leverage it this way. So the way I like to think about it is, it's my best tool to uncover hidden revenue problems. And in my opinion, the best marketers right now are the ones that can shine lights on these hidden revenue problems within their companies and figure out what they can do on the marketing side to solve those problems, how they can enable other teams to solve those problems, but more importantly, how they can share these insights they're finding so that the people that own their purview, like sales or product, they're the experts in their zones, they can go and solve those problems on their own, and they don't need marketing to come and be the parent and tell them all the time, like, hey, here's what you're doing wrong. I think there's a little bit of like the friction we see sometimes between sales and marketing, or the disbelief in maybe how product roadmaps should be built, and you're not giving me the right data kind of a mindset. So this is the best way I've seen to collaborate across teams and to really drive winning in the end, which is what it's all about. So let me talk to you a little bit about an example of how I think about win-loss analysis as well. So let's see here. Give it to the slide. Okay. So when you initially hear win-loss analysis, like, people ask me, well, they don't ask me what it is, but I actually ask them what they think it is. And here's usually what happens is they immediately almost always go to CRM data, and they think immediately in their mind, like, well, this is just us asking the salespeople. It's us doing like a report in Salesforce in the pick list loss reason in Salesforce, and having this report that shows us, hey, we're losing 60% of the time for pricing. That's the wrong way to think about win-loss analysis, and that's not how we think about it. It's a step, it's a piece of the puzzle, but if that's how you're doing it right now, or if that's how you think a robust win-loss analysis program is built, like, it's not going to deliver value for you. And in my world here, that's what I'm seeing the most in our conversations with people, is the reason they kind of deprioritize win-loss analysis, or they're not doing it, is because it's been done so poorly in the past that it's never actually connected to driving revenue or making strategic changes in a company and actually picking up insights. So don't think about it that way. And what are you going to do with that data anyway? Like, if you do a Salesforce report and you pick that loss reason because the head of sales or somebody was like, hey, we need to figure out why we're winning and losing. You're like, well, look, I'm amazing at this. Maybe it's a good place to start, but what are you going to do? Like, when the report comes back and it says pricing, and the sales reps they selected that, are you going to just send out like a 50% off coupon to your buyers? Like, what do you do with a one field drop-down answer that says pricing or that says product? You have no idea. You don't even know what the nuance behind pricing meant. You don't know if it's a dollar amount or what exactly they meant. We do buyer interviews for hundreds of companies. So we've done this thousands of times, and I've gone through these buyer interviews to pick out what are real drivers behind wins. And one of the interesting things on pricing that I'll just dive into a little bit is companies are just as likely to win or lose based on the dollar amount price as they are to the way the pricing is structured, the way you fenced product features, the way you, your terms, like if it's an annual contract, monthly contract, or if it's per user, or if it's a consumption model. So it's not always, when you hear pricing, it's not always, we just got a discount. We got to come down cheaper. That's not what the buyers are actually meaning when they say it's too expensive. So it's deeper than that. So in my mind, it's a diagnostic tool. That's what win-loss analysis is. So let me give you a little story. There's a guy on my marketing team that was a soccer player and super crazy into CrossFit, really, really fit guy for a large period of his life. And when he hit like his late 20s, he started to feel just this decline in energy. He wasn't able to run as much as he could before. He wasn't able to lift as much. His CrossFit like performance was just dropping. And we've talked about this several times and how it relates to win-loss analysis. So he's okay with me sharing this story. And he went to the doctor and they did like a physical and everything. It was like, no, you seem like everything seems fine, right? And then he was like, well, maybe I just need to sleep more. Maybe I need to maybe I'm too stressed. So he started meditation. He started to eat better. And yeah, he had some like minor improvements, but he still had this energy like problem and was just starting to feel sick. So he started to get stomach aches, started to feel even worse. So eventually he went back to his doctor and they recommended, hey, why don't you go get like deeper diagnostics? So he did a full body scan and a colonoscopy and all these other things. And they found out he had polyps in his colon. So like precancerous polyps. And that's what was dragging him down. So he went through an operation and got that removed. And now he's kind of back to where he was before. And the point of that story is back to these kind of hidden revenue problems. As much as he went through best practices, as much as he had his messaging like as good as he could think, as much as his sales team was amazing at demoing and said the right things, as much as he was doing best practices, there was a hidden problem that he was totally unaware of that it impeded him from really progressing and winning as much as he wanted. And that's what I've seen win-loss analysis do. Just yesterday, I was listening to one of our own internal win-loss interviews, and the buyer that we interviewed said something super interesting. He was mentioning a concern he had about our service, and our interviewer asked him, well, did the sales team try to help you with that objection or that concern in any way? Did they educate you about it? And he said, no, because I actually never told the sales team about that objection. You're the first person I've really told that this was a thing. So as much as we want to believe our sales team has the right answer and we could just talk to them, or we could pull it from a CRM, there's hidden problems that your CRM is not going to pick up, your sales rep's not going to pick up, and even like conversational intelligence tools like Gong, Chorus, they're amazing, but they're not going to pick it up either. So win-loss analysis to us is embedded in buyer feedback. And this is just in relation to that story. So this stat here shows sales reps are wrong about why they win and lose about 60% of the time. And it's not out of like malice from the buyer. The buyer isn't always lying to a sales rep. They just don't care enough to tell the full truth. Anyone of them that's bought anything, that you're busy, you don't have the time to explain everything to a sales rep, that you don't really care. You're not bought into that person's career. You're not going to explain every single nuance of your decision. And interestingly enough, when we've done win-loss interviews, people actually start to figure out better the real reasons they bought or didn't buy during our interview. Like maybe they just didn't feel the value, so they said, never mind, but they didn't really have a great logical explanation or reason. It was just a feeling. And then when we walk them through, like, well, tell us about your experience and walk them through the interview, that's when they start to really solidify their definition. So even if the rep asked them in an email or something, they may just give a very short answer about it was too expensive or the features weren't there or something like that. Something that you're not going to be able to drive a lot of change around. So here's why we feel like your org needs win-loss. So especially right now where Pip was alluding to the recession, especially in tech, a tech recession, right? And yeah, it seems like it's doom and gloom, and it seems like, is it actually real or not? And I can tell you, we have pipeline data from hundreds of huge companies. So I can tell you for sure, we're seeing win rates decline and pipelines decrease at the same time right now across our customer accounts. So if you're just looking at the data, yeah, like there's definitely a hit right now on win rates, and yeah, your pipeline is decreasing as well. I'm just going to check here on the questions section. Yeah, so let me get to these questions here in just 1 second. It's a little crazy to switch between screens here. So According to Gartner, a rigorous win-loss program can improve win rate by as much as 50%. According to Accenture, win rates typically increase by 18%. So if you quickly do some math, if you're 100 million in annual sales revenue, so quite large company, and you have a 20% win rate, even just a 10% improvement in win rate is an additional 10 million in sales revenue, annual sales revenue. So these things matter. Like small wins can do a ton for a company, especially in a time where every opportunity matters more. Not that they didn't matter before, but you definitely have less at bats and you're hitting the ball less. So you need to shore up everything you can do to make sure the reasons you're losing are purely economic headwinds and not performance from your marketing, sales, or product teams. And then, in my opinion, this is why you personally need win-loss. I've had dozens of these stories with our customers, the people that are our primary contacts in companies and kind of helping us run these programs. They have told me, because I'm the win-loss person at the company, I've gotten promoted or I've been able to do this part of my job better. I've personally felt it, like I've talked about before. I'm much better at marketing here at Clozd than I was in the past. And a lot of it is because of win-loss that we do. So let me talk a little bit about this maturity curve. And then I think those two questions from Donald and Dave were, I'm going to touch on those here really quick. So what we see when people are thinking about win-loss, there's this maturity curve we're seeing in the market where some companies are really adopting it. I was talking to Pip before this call about we've seen a huge increase in the category, a huge increase in the demand behind win-loss analysis. People are thinking about it a lot more. They're thinking about, we need to actually do this a lot more. And it's coming less from like a siloed research project inside of a company, like one person thinking about it. Now we're starting to see it actually from boards coming top down, where a board is asking in a board meeting, do you guys know why you're winning and losing? And if your leadership doesn't have crystal clear answers in that meeting, they're being told, you guys need to be doing win-loss. So that's what I'm kind of talking about, is this. It starts usually with guesswork and assumptions, like, oh, we know why, or we assume we know why. And those are kind of the answers that aren't good enough anymore. So if your head of sales is in a board meeting and they ask, do you know why we won and lost this deal or these deals? And they're saying, well, I think, or it's because of this. It's not as good as showing a full-on win-loss program that proves from the buyer source itself what's actually happening in your pipeline. So then we start to see people, okay, we can't just guesswork and assumption this. So let's pull some CRM fields. Let's do some internal data in the CRM, which is good. It shows you the what, like, oh, what are we losing? And maybe where are we losing? But it doesn't get to the why, which I explained earlier. And then we start to see people think about, okay, let's do it as an ad hoc research project. So we looked at the CRM, we're seeing maybe we're losing in mid-market. That's what we're losing, but we don't know exactly why. So somebody go out and do some buyer interviews, or let's send out a survey to that segment and let's start to figure out the why. And they do it like a once thing. In my mind, whenever I hear somebody say, let's go do a win-loss analysis, instead of let's run win-loss analysis as a program, I immediately kind of get this feeling of, oh, they think about it as this one-off research project instead of an ongoing muscle in the company. And that's where we go next. So companies that are doing this in the next stage are ongoing program, but they limit it in scope. They're like, okay, let's just focus on deal sizes above 100K, or let's focus on this specific product. And then companies that are really finding a lot of value out of this and driving big changes are ongoing programs. It's always on. Every single deal that's closed, won, or lost, they try to get some form of feedback from the buyer, and they are covering their entire pipeline. Every single deal that comes through, they're trying to get win-loss data about those deals. So before I get into the 8 traits, so Donald, you asked, wondering about how the dynamic is different between an employee doing the interview versus a third party. So firsthand, what I've seen is typically a buyer is a lot more candid with a third party. And there's kind of 2 reasons for that. One, nobody wants to tell you your baby's ugly. So a lot of times people are actually just nice and they don't want to tell the sales rep that they were terrible and that they botched the entire thing, or that if a product person is on the call, they kind of like tone it down and they're not maybe as candid with with the actual company or with the sales rep or whoever's doing the interview. You can limit that a little bit if you approach this from like, hey, maybe you have a different job title than sales rep, or maybe you come at it as like, hey, I'm just a market researcher within the company, and we're trying to identify like where our core strengths and weaknesses are. And you need to come about it a little more light, because a lot of times that negotiation gate is still in place with a buyer, where they don't want to give power to a sales rep and tell them every single reason, because they have the feeling that you're going to waste their time and try to win back that opportunity and try to overcome their objections instead of just truly listening and understanding what went wrong in that deal. And that's what I see a lot, is win-loss kind of gets focused in the, well, can we still go get them? Can we still overcome these things or whatever? And then the other part is, from the third party, they become more candid purely because we do this full time. Like, we have a full-time team. We've created a methodology around the interview, around how to get the data, how to synthesize it, how to get buyer feedback, how to incentivize. Like, it's an entire team and company built around this, and we're doing it full time. So frankly, we're just a lot better at it than a lot of people are. If you can get those skills and you can become an amazing interviewer, and you know how to synthesize and share the data, and you can do it at scale and timely, in a timely manner, yeah, you probably have a good approach, and you, I would hope, would have better industry knowledge than we probably have. But typically what I've found is we're better at the interviewing and better at getting the insights and synthesizing that through our entire program. So to me, that's the two reasons. We can dig deeper with buyers. They're already a little more open with us. And then we're just better at digging deeper. And then the other question from Dave is, can we combine buyer persona interviews with win-loss? How much of a difference is there between the two types of interviews? So, yeah, so the interesting thing is, you can combine them, and let me actually pause on this one, and we'll talk about interview best practices, and I'll tell you why some people muddy the water too much, and they don't actually get the win-loss data they need, and we can talk about that. So to us, there's 8 traits of a world-class win-loss program. So you need executive sponsorship. If you're going to try to go get a list of buyers, you need the head of sales to be on board, or else they're not going to give you their list of buyers. Also, if you start getting feedback that is hard for them to hear, you need that executive sponsorship to make sure the feedback can be distributed. And maybe you should filter some of it, or the impact it would have on a specific person, but it shouldn't be like, hey, this sales leader only wants us to go interview these 10 deals because that sales leader knows for sure the 10 deals, and he's just using confirmation bias to kind of prove out what he thinks those 10 deals want. So you need the executive sponsorship. Also, you need it because the only reason you're doing win-loss is to enact change in your company. Excuse me. So getting the sponsorship beforehand, once the feedback and insights start coming in, it's a faster loop to make strategic changes, and then doing the win-loss again to see if those strategic changes made an impact. And then multi-channel feedback. So you should be getting it from, like I said before, we embedded in buyer feedback, but you should not ignore completely CRM, sales reps, and then doing that feedback in different mixes like interviews and surveys. And then, like I said before, effective data gathering. Can you actually do an interview that talks to exactly why the customer bought or didn't buy? And I've tried these interviews early in my career and was not good at them. And I've seen a lot of people go out and do these, and at the end of the interview, they're like, I don't really know if I got the detail I needed out of that interview. Then they're operational and ongoing. So they're plugged into systems, they're CRM integrated, they pull data from wins and losses immediately. They go out and get the feedback loop going as soon as the deal closes, which goes right into the current data. A lot of times I see companies do like, hey, let's do a win-loss on all of these things we lost last quarter. And it takes them like 6 months to get that data. So you're already about 9 months behind the data being current. And in that time span, a tech recession hit, or new competitors have entered the market, or pricing changes have occurred, or whatever. So you don't even have current data to enact change upon. And interpreting the results can be challenging too. Like, actually getting them is tough. And then once you have them, figuring out what are meaningful insights here that I can share. And then that goes into the share the findings with the other team. So I've seen a lot of people make the mistake of, I'm going to go do a win-loss program and it's going to set me up as a leader in why we win and lose, and I'm going to silo that information and protect it because I want to be the smartest person in the room, that's the wrong way to do it. If you can find insights about product, sales, marketing, pricing, customer success, whatever it is about your company, you can find all those problems and you think you have the answers to all of them, you probably shouldn't be in the job you're in right now. You should be maybe leading like a Fortune 500 company as a CEO if you're that great, or maybe you should be doing something totally different. That's kind of an impossible ask, to feel like you're the one that's going to find all these insights and be the one that solves all of them. You should actually just share them faster than you do now and get people that are experts in their domain to be the ones that solve them. And then measuring success. So it's not as simple as like, let's just go and interview some customers. You actually need to interview them, get insights, take strategic change, and then measure whether that is making an impact or not. So let me talk a little bit about the mix that you should be looking at. Like if you're going to do surveys and interviews, the first thing I'll caveat here is people don't like to do two types of feedback typically. So if your first thought is, let's go blast everybody with a survey and then I'll interview the ones that I care about the most, don't do both at the outset. The reason for that is they may just fill out the survey and you're not going to get as much detailed information from a survey as you will from an interview, just in my experience. So if you blast a survey to 100 people, you could be lucky and get like a 5% response rate from won and lost deals. And so that means you got 5 responses, but that means all 100 of your deals just got hit up with a survey. So when you send out an interview request, your interview response rate is going to go it's going to go below what it should be at. So our methodology is to index on interviews first, figure out who we want to interview, which deals are most important to you, send that invite, and then we use surveys as a supplementary feedback on top of the interviews because you get the most rich feedback through interviews. But it matters about your pipeline too. So if you have on the left side here, your average deal size is low to high, and on the bottom, your volume of opportunities is low to high. So if you have high average deal sizes and a low volume of opportunities, like some of our customers we work with have 10 opportunities a year, but they're easily in the 8-figure range on average deal size, you should try to interview every single one of those opportunities. Like they spend a lot of time with you trying to evaluate whether or not you're a solution for them. And they're huge deal sizes. You should spend a lot of time in those interviews and figuring out, and maybe even interviewing multiple people within the company to figure out why the entire buying committee decided yes or no. And then if your volume of opportunities is super high and your average deal size is very low, think like retail or more of a B2C motion, you probably don't need to spend as much time interviewing and you could get by with surveys. But I would still try to interview to talk with your customers and figure out what's kind of driving them and use the survey data to supplement what you're finding in the interviews. And then where we like to land is kind of right in the mix, the middle. And so best practices for buyer surveys, they should be simple and brief. You need to use decision drivers, or what we call them. So you need to create categories of what's driving deals so that at the end you can synthesize the data together and not rely on a script or using the same interview as you would the buyer survey. Then you need to get competitive information. It's a very robust tool for competitive information. Recency, do it as quick as you can. And then the incentive. So Natalia just asked, how do you motivate lost leads to have an interview? We incentivize them. So it varies by buyer persona. Some buyer personas are way more likely to give you feedback. Like we found people in HR or people in marketing, they love giving feedback. But if you're selling to like a security engineer or somebody like that, they're way less inclined to respond. And so we have to do a little more incentive. It also matters kind of on job title. Like if you're trying to go after a CEO of a large size company, you probably need to incentivize pretty well to get into that person's calendar. So this is what I mean by decision drivers. So we bucket our interviews, our feedback data through these categories we call decision drivers. And you can spend time building these yourselves. We put them into buckets like marketing, sales experience, product solution, your company or brand reputation, pricing and packaging, or other. And inside of each of these categories, you can see on the slide here, we have subcategories like for example, in our in-house program under marketing, I like to ask questions like, talk to me about how marketing's content or website or things like that influenced your deal. And then I have these people score that, or I score it after what I talk to them, either strong positive or strong negative. And it's the first time in my career I've been able to show creatives on my team, like copywriters, web developers, graphic designers, or even my content guy, hey, look how you impacted this deal. They loved this this web page feature you built, or they loved this webinar that we did, or they loved our podcast, or whatever it is. And you can actually start to attribute the creative brand work your marketing team is doing a little stronger to influencing revenue. And it's not just like, well, we're just doing brand stuff for the sake of doing brand stuff. So on surveys, you need to structure them with these decision drivers in mind. Don't make it too crazy or robust. Let them pick the ones that they want to talk about, and then you allow them to go deeper as they want. So it doesn't need to be as rigid as like they don't have to answer every single one of these because they may not have an opinion about it. And then you need to allow buyers to rate positive and negative drivers for each opportunity. So at the end, you can score these things and then synthesize the data with your interview guide. And then the competitive information. So if lost, confirm whether you lost to a competitor or no decision. This one's huge. I've seen a ton of companies come to us and say, we need to figure out why we're winning and losing against this one competitor. We'll go out and do a full win-loss program. And in that program, they'll quickly realize you're not winning or losing to that one competitor. You're losing to a no decision, which is kind of worse because neither you nor the competitor are convincing this buyer to actually care about your category or your product. So that one's very interesting. And then won or lost, confirm the primary competitor. So confirm, like, who are you going up against? And then you can start to really quickly see how the market's moving, who you're starting to win and lose against, why you're winning and losing against them specifically. And then you can start to make some competitive strategic maneuvers around those competitors. All right, so buyer interviews. So let's see. So Dave, to your question about how you can combine buyer persona interviews with win-loss, the light bulb thing on the right, the point of a win-loss buyer interview is find out why the deal was won or lost. I've seen way too many people try to do too much in a win-loss interview. They'll go in and do, hey, I'm going to do buyer persona research. I'm going to go in and try to get a case study out of this. I'm going to just narrow specifically down into marketing. No, like the point of this is to have an open conversation with this person about everything that influenced them into why they won or lost the deal. Here's the cool thing though. Doing that will give you buyer persona data, but it will also give you the specific reasons you're winning and losing across multiple deals. And that information is way more useful to the sales team and the product team and your pricing team and your marketing team than a PDF buyer persona doc where you did some buyer persona interviews. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but if you do a PDF buyer persona doc and you kick that over to the sales team, that's definitely not as amazing as, hey, over the last 30 deals, here's specifically what happened with the sales experience that I think we could improve to help you guys win more. Like, you're not talking about this feature enough. You're demoing it in the wrong way. Or you're confusing the hell out of your buyers when you talk about pricing. Though that's much richer winning information than a buyer persona PDF. And so the other ones let's talk about. So you got to create the right interview guide. Don't script them. These should be open and conversations based on these decision driver categories. And after you have the conversation, you can tag certain parts of the conversation into these categories, and that will help you synthesize it with your CRM data or with your survey data. But you got to create that right interview guide beforehand. The thing that I see people do a lot of times is they feel like I got to have that interview guide fully baked. A lot of times when you do that, you're assuming you already know the reasons you're winning and losing. So we like to actually make the interview guide pretty brief at the beginning. Like, it's by very general categories: sales experience, marketing experience, pricing, product experience, etc. And then as you start to get the feedback, you can dive in deeper and really start to understand, okay, you know what? We clearly have a problem with our pricing. So let's adjust the interview guide and go deeper. And you should already do that in the interview. That's why I said don't script them. Because what I see a lot of times people do is they'll have a script that's like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, talk to me about how pricing impacted your decision. Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how did you feel about our pricing? And like 1 is negative and 10 is great. And they'll mark a 1 and they're like, okay, thank you. And then they'll move on to the next thing. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, talk to me about the sales experience. Oh, it was a 10. It was great. Hey, they just told you have a problem with pricing. You didn't even double click into that and dive deeper. So make it adaptive and probe deeper. If you spend the entire conversation on pricing, that's not a bad thing, especially if it's the thing that drove their decision the highest, right? So, and then, yeah, we incentivize these back to Natalia's question. Don't make them super long interviews. Make them very clear what they're going to get out of the gate, what they're going to look like. It's just an interview. We're not going to try to win you back. It's about to understand what we can do better. And we'll give you whatever it is, a $50 Amazon gift card or whatever if you participate. So I'll touch on this really quick because we're running a little short on time. But like I said before, people are devaluing win-loss because they've done it the wrong way. So there's 3 big barriers to doing it the right way. Well, the first one is getting the feedback. Like, how do you get buyers to talk to you at scale? How do you get enough of that feedback? The second one is after you get the feedback, how do you actually dive deep and figure out what insights are there? Figure out what strategic insights you're finding. What are these hidden revenue problems that your company didn't know about before? And then the third one is sharing. Like, okay, now that you've actually been able to overcome obstacle 1 and get the feedback at scale, and you've been able to overcome obstacle 2, finding actual insights within the feedback that you've uncovered. And then the third obstacle is, how the heck do I share this with all of these stakeholders in real time, like through Slack or email or whatever it might be, so they can take action faster? It's not enough to just set up a meeting and be like, hey, I've got some Evernote notes here about some interviews I've done with customers, and here's some of the things I've found. You're not going to drive strategic action with that. So here's how we do it. So when an interview is published, after we've done an interview, we have a Slack integration that immediately kicks into whatever Slack channel you want. And you can even segment this by decision driver. So if you have, hey, they specifically talked about marketing as a decision driver, that can push to the marketing channel, or product can push to product, or sales to sales, or whatever you want. We have just a closed for closed Slack channel that's company-wide. So everyone in the company sees exactly why every deal was won or lost. And then we have email notifications to go out as well. So that's how it should be done. So to kind of conclude here, I just want to double click on this. So when you don't know why your customers are churning, what they don't like about your product, or why you're losing sales, getting the insight that win-loss provides will completely change your business. That's been my experience. That was Diana Massaro's experience. One of our customers, she actually told me a personal story about how some people on the leadership team were like, Diana, why do you care so much about this? This is not an expensive solution by any means. And she like kind of staked her reputation on win-loss driving the right change they needed. So that's it. If you want to get in touch with me, if you want to chat deeper about this, if you have other questions, I am open to chatting anyways, and helping deeper if anybody wants to go there. And then we also have a resource for anyone that's kind of just getting started. This is a totally free course that we built. It's like a 6-week course. We did it live, and now it's just on demand, winloss101.com. And we have a cool offer in there. If you go through a good amount, I think it's 3 of the courses, and do some of the homework, like creating your interview guide and figuring out which buyers you're going to talk to, we'll give you 3 free buyer interviews. So we'll send our team out and do 3 of these interviews for you and show you kind of the groundwork you should be laying. That's it.
Awesome. Right on. Okay. Lots of questions here. So let's see. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep. Perfect.
All right. Okay, so I'll start with my questions. I guess I'm going to take advantage of my position here. Okay, win-loss interview. What are the top 3 to 5 questions that you ask? It's not, why did you not buy us, or why did you buy us? It's probably something better.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it should be an open conversation. So you should start in honestly with very general. Let's see, am I still on, Pip? I've got a notification here that I've got a connection issue.
I can see you and
Okay,
hear
perfect. So typically our win-loss interviews start like any conversation you had. So talk to me about your experience. Talk to me about what kind of drove your decision. I like to start it. I've guided our interview guide here internally. Like, how did you first hear about Clozd? Because I love using win-loss buyer feedback as also an additional attribution source and a touch point, like in my multi-touch attribution modeling that I'm looking at. So we like to ask, how did you hear about Clozd? What kickstarted you guys to look for a solution like this? Questions like that, like really just start to dive in like you would with anybody when you're talking to them about why they bought something.
Okay.
Yeah.
In your experience, seeing all the various reasons why people buy,
Yeah.
how important is clearly seeing the economic value, like meaning being very clear on how much money we're making or saving thanks to solution?
Totally. So that's an amazing one, because what people will usually say, you have to translate it. Like if they'll tell you in the buyer's journey, they'll tell the sales rep, this is just too expensive. I don't have budget. That's what they'll say. When we go and do the buyer interview and we dive deeper with them, they'll say exactly what you're alluding to, Pip. Like, well, I didn't see an ROI. I didn't see how this would impact this metric or this goal that I have to actually prove out the value. A lot of times companies are selling into spaces where there isn't a budget already there, especially if you're building a category or if you're a new solution. Like I'm sure Winter hits this. You guys are kind of developing something a lot of companies haven't done. There's no line item budget, for me at least, to be like, hey, let's do a messaging testing tool in advance or something like that, right? So you're trying to create a budget. So of course they're not going to like just have it there. They're going to tell you that I don't have budget or it's too expensive. So that's a sales experience issue. It can be a pricing issue. And you need to dive deeper into that. Is it actually pricing is just dollar for dollar not showing an ROI and your thing's too expensive? Sure, it could be that. But maybe you're just confusing the way your pricing is structured and people can't clearly see the ROI coming out of the demo.
Absolutely. Like when we explain Winter's value, it's like, yeah, I like message testing seems kind of nice, but I'm here, generating revenue. So I don't know if this fits into my plans. And then I'm like, well, what if I would get you 20% more demos? How many dollars would you make over the next 12 months?
Yep.
Oh, $1 million.
Yep.
Well, paying $20K for Winter seems like nothing. It's 50x ROI,
Yeah, exactly.
Economic value.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, you have to show that. Yeah.
What are some other key reasons you see companies like winning or losing?
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite parts of my job too, Pip, is I'm living and breathing that data. I'm diving in and pulling out these stories. We're actually right now exploring with natural language processing and AI how to pull out more of this data with customers that have opted in to like some benchmarking things. So we're going to be creating content that's specific to each kind of category. Like, okay, in marketing, how do you influence? Because it's not really, a lot of times people think about this as too binary. They're like, well, it was this one thing, it was product. It's all of these things influence the entire deal outcome. And one of the interesting things you'll find too is if you do this at scale, some people say, hey, let's just do lost interviews, right? And you'll do lost interviews and you'll figure out, man, we're missing this feature on our product, so we have to include that. But if you had included one interviews as well, you would have found actually that missing that feature helps you win in certain segments too. Like it's not as binary as like, you know what I mean? So that's why you need to do both wins and losses to for sure know, is this driving just loss, and know if it's an actual weakness. So some of the things that we see, like I talked a little bit about pricing. Pricing can be a big one, but it's more nuanced than what we've talked about. Some of the interesting things there are like your pricing terms. So I've seen a lot of companies from board pressure to turn you into like an annual SaaS subscription product. They'll move away from a monthly no contract model to an annual contract model. And in a lot of cases, that was one of their biggest differentiators, was not having a contract, being monthly, especially if you're selling to like cash flow sensitive businesses like small business or sometimes mid-market, right? So we've had a few companies do that. They're like, well, we need to turn into an annual recurring revenue model. Sure, I get that. So you can get higher valuations, but at the same time, you're going to kill your win rate in the same sentence. So that's an interesting one. It's been really, really, really amazing for me as a marketer to see how impactful your brand is, your reputation, the strength of your brand. A lot of us index way too much on pipeline generation and lead gen and all of these things. And we don't think enough about, how do I position my company with a solid brand strength and reputation to really drive a win? And some of the things I've seen there that have been really cool to help me plan out what my marketing mix is. For example, we did a CRM analysis like you typically do at a company to figure out what's our CAC on marketing spend and what are our most efficient channels and where should we double down? Should we do more ad spend? Should we do more events? All of these types of things, right? And when you do that CRM analysis, you miss all of these critical things that buyers tell you at the end. So let me give you a really clear example. So we do an annual event called Win-Loss Week that's all about win-loss analysis and about winning. And we don't see a lot of opportunities come out of that event. We see some, but what I see a lot in these buyer interviews is the opportunity came from like cold outbound, or it came from organic on the traffic. And I know a lot of people are talking about this, but enough people aren't talking about how win-loss shapes it for you. So I'll go through and read these interviews. And if I'm just looking at CRM data, I'd probably turn off Win-Loss Week. I'd be like, this is so ineffective and it's way too expensive. Why are we doing this? But then when I read the interviews, they'll say things like, you are the only vendor we looked at because of Win-Loss Week. Or I was kind of thinking about it and I said yes to the rep, and then I saw Win-Loss Week and I decided this is the company I want to be with. So finally, like in my career, I can prove to a board and to my exec team how brand marketing initiatives aren't just totally pipeline focused, like on lead gen, right? But they're actually establishing the brand as the thought leader and they're driving wins. And that's really the type of marketing you should be indexing on, right? So that's a huge one, brand strength and reputation. The sales experience is interesting to me because a lot of us dive into companies and we think best practices like, oh, I immediately have to buy these 3 software platforms because we need our lead response time to be the best in the industry. We need our demo to look or feel like this. I need to show pricing on the website. I need to do X, Y, and Z, right? And they build all of these things, best practice, before they even understand, are those things actually impacting a won or a lost deal? So in my world right now, it's like, let's not just dive in and buy all these software things because everybody says that's best practice when they may not even matter to our buyer. Like my buyer might not actually care about hitting an SDR first. They might actually want a more guided call. And this typically isn't the case. This maybe is a bad example, but they may want an AE on the call a little bit harder than another buyer would. Some industries are more like, hey, I want to be self-service. I don't even want to talk to a sales rep, et cetera, right? But companies are just indexing on general stats about buyers instead of really truly understanding what their buyers want. Some products are complicated. Some buyers are junior. They've never even bought what you sell, and you're selling to a more junior person who legitimately wants a consultative sales experience. They don't want to click through to the website and try to figure it out on their own. But you need to figure that out before you just place things in.
Let me pause you here. We got a lot of questions. Let's pick up the pace and do like rapid fire style.
Yeah, sounds good.
One last one from me, and then we go take the audience question. So, how often do you do this? Is it monthly, quarterly, etc.? And then how many interviews per cadence?
Sorry, repeat that one more time.
So how often do you do win-loss interview surveys? Do you do this every month, or do you do this quarterly, or what's the cadence?
There isn't a cadence. It's based on your pipeline and your sales cadence. So it should be every single deal that goes through your pipeline gets a win-loss review, gets some sort of, it's either survey or interview targeted at it. So it's not like, hey, I'm going to do a chunk of win-loss interviews or surveys this month and then a chunk in 3 months. It's okay, we had this many deals come through. We should try to get feedback on all of them.
So lost deals, people who went with somebody else. How would you motivate them to do the interview with you?
Yeah, so incentives work really well. There's some buyer personas that are inclined to offer feedback more than others. Like HR people are very open people. It seems like we have really high response rates with them, even on lost deals. Marketers love to share feedback. You feel a lot of times. Some other buyer personas are more gated and they need an incentive. So you're not going to get everybody. What's that?
What's the incentive? How much do you pay them?
Yeah, it just varies by industry. You need to experiment with it. So start with $25, $50 gift cards. Obviously, if you have you can kind of feel that out. If your buyer persona is really senior and $50 is meaningless to them, go to $100, go to $150. You have to experiment with it because naturally you'd think if I offer $150, I'll get a higher response rate than $75. But our data is showing the opposite. 75 performs better than $150 for some reason. So just experiment with it.
Sten is asking, how do you get real answers? Sometimes clients give the easy, fast answers, and they don't even know themselves what the real answer is.
Yeah. First, you need to make sure you're talking to the right person. So you have to have sales collaboration on this to make sure you are interviewing the right person that really knows the reasons. If you need to interview more than one person in a company, go and do that. Because you're right, sometimes there's a buying committee and one person maybe doesn't have as much info as three people might have. And then our methodology really is if you come about this in a way that puts down people's fences, their walls, if they don't feel like you're trying to win them back, if they don't feel like you're trying to overcome objections, if they feel like you truly value their feedback, they're going to be more open with you. And then it just takes practice to ask the right questions, to dive deeper, like double click on problems, but just make it a conversation. Don't try to be scripted too much. And once you start to do that at scale, you're going to really see like the real reasons. We've even had people they would never do this with a sales rep. They will, in our buyer interview calls with companies we do, they'll pull up their spreadsheet with their annual budget on it. And they'll be like, hey, here's my budget for headcount. And they'll show everybody's salaries. Here's my budget for tools and systems. As you can see, like this clearly doesn't fit in anywhere. And they didn't show me the ROI, so I didn't make it fit anywhere. I would never do that with a sales rep. I'm not going to show a sales rep my entire annual budget. So once you get good at that, these like open conversational things, you're going to start to see people are opening up.
Cool. Next one. What's a typical or acceptance rate? So 100 deals, I'll send out invites to a survey interview. What's a good acceptance rate?
So our average across all industries is 20%. We've seen as high as 40 to 50%. We've seen as low as about 10%. So it kind of varies, but I would target to try to get 10 or 15. You have to be more persistent than you maybe think. Like a lot of times people are like, well, these 100 deals, let's send out one email and see who we can get. We literally have an entire sequence and cadence built out for this with dynamic incentives built in where, okay, let's try $25 on the first one. If they totally ignore it, hey, maybe 25 wasn't enough for you. And we say that in the email, like, would you be willing to talk with us for 75? Like you have to put a whole program behind this to get to that 20, 30% range. Or else, yeah, it's going to be really low, but something is better than nothing. So at least try.
Yep. What's the dynamic, or what is different between an employee doing the interviews versus a third party?
Yeah. And I think I kind of talked about it a little bit. So in our experience, it's been two things. The first is buyers are just naturally more candid with the third party. They are more open. They don't have as many walls up about like, oh, you're just trying to get objections to win me back, that kind of stuff. And then the other one, because here's what happens a lot of times. You'll go in the interview and they'll say something like, well, the reason I didn't buy is because you don't have this feature. And you love your company and you just spent 6 months launching that feature that they said you don't have. So what are you going to do in that call? Of course, you can be like, well, we actually do have that feature. Your interview's dead immediately. Like as soon as you start to talk like that, right? So a third party, we don't care if you have that feature or not. We just want the buyer's perspective. And that's how you need to approach it. But it's a lot easier for us to do that. And the buyer already feels that. And then the other part is we're really good at interviewing. We do this full time. We have a team that's been trained up to do these interviews at scale really, really well. And they dive deep and they understand the industries as well as they can. So in our experience, the third party interviews are more candid. They actually do share the real reasons. Like they'll say that sales rep was the worst sales rep I've ever worked with. They're really hard things.
Yeah.
And they may not say that to you because they know you work with that sales rep, right?
Yeah. Last question. Interviews are obviously richer than surveys, but like, what are some things that you can get from surveys?
Yeah. So surveys can guide, they can give you more quantitative data. That's one of the biggest reasons win-loss has failed in the past is people will go and do the interviews because they're deeper insight mechanisms, right? And they'll say, well, okay, but this is 5 customers. You talk to 5 people. Can we actually make decisions on this? So a lot of times we use the surveys as kind of that quantitative statistical significance gut check that people feel more comfortable making big changes in a company with. So we'll use them to enhance the interview data. Like, okay, we had 5 people in interviews say this, and now we've had 150 survey responses kind of confirm very similar things, right? Or confirm that one thing. So we use it for that. Sometimes people are just more inclined a little bit to do surveys because they seem to be quicker, but in our experience, like we have a higher response rate on interviews. So that's not really, so that could be the case in your company, but maybe not. And then a lot of times it has to do with your pipeline. Like if it's a huge lift, or let's say like, okay, if you're going to buy a house, you're going to go look at a bunch of houses, you're going to go walk through them. You're spending a lot of money and time. You're going to understand your realtor more. You're going to understand the houses more. You're going to understand the housing market. Like you're doing way deeper analysis as a buyer in that versus buying a microwave. So if your pipeline is selling microwaves, like it might not make a ton of sense to do deep dive interviews with people because they're probably going to, say things like, well, yeah, I just went on the website and I, for 5 minutes, decided not to do it. Like a survey might be better in that experience.
Awesome. And we're out of time. So Trenton, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Everybody go follow him, connect with him on LinkedIn, and I'll see you on the internet somewhere.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Pip.
Cheers. See you later, everybody.